Let's take a little bit of time to actually go through the report that came out today, the Royal Commission report, which has been going for some years into veteran suicide. Now, you know, as long-term viewers of the program, we've been talking about this for as long as we've had access to a television camera or microphone. I spoke about it a lot on radio, written about it in the paper. You know that I share your love of everyone who defends the country, and I share the tragedy of those who end up taking their own lives after serving their country. In fact, it was years ago now, believe it or not, when the women who were brave enough to stand up and ask for a form of accountability out of governments, the Department of Veterans Affairs and so many others, way back 2019 is when we had all those mums around the table, talking about their boys, talking about the system that broke their boys and talking about a system that broke their boys even after they had left the service. Today, one of the Royal Commissioners, Nick Caldis, a man who should have been a police commissioner, but thankfully was not, so his work was able to be in this area. He has presented a massive report, 6 different volumes, incredible detail in all of it, and here's in part what he had to say about that massive volume of effort. This is where I've been spending most of my day today, not all the way through it, and I'll bring you more tomorrow, but this is why he reflects on the importance of this report and why it's one of those moments where the nation has to stand still, pay attention.
Well, when there's been dozens of inquiries and hundreds of recommendations, I'd say that's a failure in leadership. What is clear from some of the horrible stories that we've heard is that many people simply turned a blind eye over many years and felt it was too hard. We feel that unless there is an entity with enough power and resources to tackle the problems, they're simply going to persist. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect the result to come out different.
The report concludes that there have been 1,200 suicides in the lead up to the Royal Commission. There are other stats in there. Again, I'll bring them to you tomorrow night. But amazingly, again, one of the co-commissioners told us that the majority of people that have taken their own lives didn't actually end up going to war, which means they've been traumatised while being in the service and in the country.
It certainly is a misconception. People associate suicide with the experience of PTSD alone, coming from combat experiences. That's not actually what we're finding. What we're finding is there is a lot of trauma and a lot of exposure to trauma, but it's trauma through the cumulative effects of what they experience day in and day out through service and into their post-service life. So it's not combat related, but it is trauma related.
That's really important. Now, there are all sorts of findings here. There are more than 120 of them. I think all of them seem incredibly reasonable to me, and they should be already being adopted by the government, but I'll get to that in a second. But again, rather than just brush over it and then move on to the next subject and get into the red meat of the Team Red, Team Blue, let's actually pay respect to those that have taken their own lives, respect to the mothers who made this Royal Commission happen, and respect to the need and the work of this Royal Commission to actually have a look at what it has recommended. Now, I'm not going to sit here and read 120 recommendations to you, but there are going to be a few, so have a look here. They believe that Defence should take steps to mitigate adverse impacts of posting. So when you move families around all the time, what are the difficulties that appear for the families? What pressures does that put on the soldiers? Great recommendation. Recommendation 5, support serving members to decompress, rest and regenerate, especially after high-risk experiences. Now, these high-risk experiences could be everything from live fire, training exercises all the way through to war. Excellent. Recommendation 7 is to increase the employment opportunities of members of the Defence Force in other parts of the Defence Force. So if you go from being a soldier, then there should be an opportunity for you to find work within the Defence Force rather than just being forced to choose between being an active service member and somebody who is working in service of other service members. That is an excellent recommendation. Recommendation 11. It assesses that the Australian Defence Force leadership has to start hearing about their role in culture, health and well-being. And importantly, they have to start listening to the people below them, and the people below them should have greater power in helping to decide who moves up the ranks. So rather than just people moving up the ranks because they're good politicians inside the organisation, are they good people? Are they good leaders of men and women? Recommendation 12, consider the emotional intelligence of people as they move up through the organisation. Again, you don't just hire the person who's going to follow the rule book and implement the policy from the current level of brass or do what the government wants. You promote people who have the support of the people below them, who have the caring and the understanding and the emotional capacity to continue to move up the leadership ranks. Recommendation 19. Protect victims of sexual misconduct inside the service and make sure that there are absolutely no consequences to their career for speaking up. Now, there are plenty of examples of people who don't speak up because they're afraid that that will effectively end their career and they will stay at the rank that they currently are. We need to have a scenario where the person who tells the truth about what is happening to them or has been happening to them and whom did it is given the capacity to move up, and rather than the old network protecting itself and making sure that people who complain are troublemakers and pushed out the side door, no, that shouldn't be the case. That should be written into the law. Recommendation 22 is to adopt a policy of mandatory discharge for any member of the Australian Defence Force who is convicted of sexual or related offences. No second chances, no other ways around. I'm not talking about minor stuff. We're talking about making sure that once it is proven that you have done wrong by your fellow member of the Defence Force in those areas, out the door, goodbye. Of course, obviously, whoever goes out the door, they should also have the levels of emotional support to make sure that they too don't end up in a scenario where they go from sort of rooster to feather duster in a day and everyone doesn't look take care of them, but you get my point. Recommendation 39. This is important because I want to respect the work of the Royal Commission. I know you care about it. I know you can follow the detail. Thank you for being patient as I go through this, but it really matters. Recommendation 39 is to address the risk factors of suicide and suicidality and report progress as part of this in and around the Defence Force. So suicide and awareness of it, awareness of what the warning signs might be in the process to make sure that we can capture people before they go down a very dark path. Excellent idea. 42, ensure that future Inspector Generals of the ADF are not from the ADF. Now, obviously, I don't want a bunch of identitarians and lifetime public servants trying to turn the Defence Force into a woke version of the tax office with guns. I get it. But if part of the problem is the culture, the way to break the culture is you've got to bring somebody in from outside on top of the process so that regardless of who's mates with who and who owes who a favour, that the right thing is done. The Inspector General should automatically be able to investigate the deaths of by suicide of serving members. So again, this doesn't just go off automatically and it still goes to a coronial process, but the ADF doesn't get to say, sorry, wipe our hands, not our problem anymore now, it's a state police matter because someone did something under a bridge. Excellent, excellent idea. 48, when a member dies by suicide, legal officers to represent the interests of that person and their family are appointed by the ADF. So it's not just your family that's fighting the bureaucracy. You essentially have sort of a lawyer on your behalf, a legal aid paid for by the taxpayer person to help traverse the process. Because normal people obviously are not equipped to be able to go up against the giant bureaucracies and the cultures in and around the Defence Force. I think that's very close to the best of all of the recommendations. There also should be the establishment of a brain injury program, because the reality is that, as we know, there are consequences when people play high-contact sport and may well go on to have issues with their brains that may well result in mental illness and a noise and a frustration that means they eventually end up taking their own life. The same should be there for the members of the Defence Force. They need to improve the access and timelines of quality mental health screening. So this stuff needs to be as important to the Defence Force as the physical preparedness of the Defence Force. Your mental health matters. The Department of Veterans Affairs should be able to fund a program to support well-being in the transition from your time in the Defence Force to civilian life. Now, I am a little surprised that in many of the recommendations there is no plan to blow up and restart the Department of Veterans Affairs. In my view, the Department of Veterans Affairs has shown itself to be like a private insurance company. Do its best to delay as long as possible, do its best to deny. No, even if you've served the country for a day, I say roll gold treatment for every single one of the brave men and women who decide to put the uniform on. Another one. increase the opportunities for members to gain civilian qualifications from defence training and education. So rather than just saying on your CV, X number of years in the ADF, here are the things that I've done, start to put a qualification next to it. So I know that you can do your service and do extra education. Well, why not the stuff you learn in the Defence Force counts as the same sorts of things that would result with you getting a trade certificate or a university degree. Again, excellent. 85, develop employment pathways for ex-servicemen and women in the public sector. What a great idea. Again, once you go from being an active service member, if there's not a job for you somewhere inside the ADF, then why not try to find a way to use these skills in the wider public service? Excellent idea. Because it's all about creating pathways to quote-unquote normal life after serving. You have to establish a brand new agency, and normally I hate bureaucracy, but if a brand new agency is exclusively focused, full-time job of people to be on veterans' wellbeing, great. You can't fund it enough, you can't have enough people in it, because people need to be taken care of. You need to improve support communication with those defence families. Not wait for them to dig through to find the answers, give them the answers when they ask. Finally, 106, establish a suicide database for serving and ex-serving members, because this is the point. The numbers still are vague. We are still in a grey zone about numbers. The numbers that are in this Royal Commission are clear about what happened prior to the Royal Commission, and then it gets a little vague from when this thing started. And it started, of course, in and around 2019. So it's been going for a couple of years. You would think by now there would be an absolute clarity of any and everyone who has worn the uniform, is wearing the uniform and takes their own life, that we count that as a suicide of an ex-service person. One of the many mothers that has been fighting for this, they spoke today to the newspapers. The transition from the ADF back to civilian life is something that needs to be implemented as soon as possible. When mental health issues, often caused within the ADF, are the reason for the discharge, they shouldn't be medically discharged immediately like my son. You see, that's an important point. You don't just get discharged, bugger off, there's your pension, nothing else to see. If the problems occur because of what happened in the workplace, and this of course is a very unique workplace, then the workplace has a responsibility, and yes, that means in many ways financial, to follow you, in my view, for the rest of your life. Colleen Pillen, again, whose son took her own life, says ongoing support, even after discharge, is also important to ensure the wellbeing of all members. The veteran should be retrained for other suitable roles. Well, again, that is part of what is in this report. Great to see. Jackie Lambie. I have my problems with her. I disagree with her most of the time. She has worn the uniform and she has led the charge. She has led the charge for this to become the Royal Commission. It is to her credit that that has now happened. Her belief, and again, at this point I can't see anything in the Royal Commission, but she thinks the problem is the Defence Force Academy itself. That there is a problem with the way that we train, and there's a problem with the way that we promote, and there's a problem with the people who go into certain levels of Defence Force training. She says, blow it all up, start again.
You can wonder why those families and those mothers that have been out there for years and everybody else is saying, don't join until it's fixed. I do not want to have to get on that bandwagon, but if they don't change their ways over the next 3 to 6 months, I will, and that is going to hurt. If you want to fix the culture of leadership in defence, I suggest that today you make a decision as a government to shut down the Australian Defence Force Academy. Okay, shut it down, because we're only getting a lot of little rich kids there with no life experience, and they're the ones that end up in charge.
Which takes us back to the things about emotional intelligence, about the people beneath you having a role in who ends up moving up, making sure that the people who complain about those who move up are not kept at a certain level and then eventually pushed out the side door. Again, I disagree with so much and I've talked about it, but I have to give credit where it's due and she deserves the credit on this particular issue. I hope that she uses her many media platforms to follow through with what these recommendations are. Now, both the Prime Minister and Peter Dutton have thanked the commissioners for the report. They've said all the right things about the service people, but then the Prime Minister today, amazingly, turned around and has not told us how many of these recommendations that he's willing to accept and when, if ever, they will actually be put in place. Now, this matters because the government didn't get the report today, like the rest of us, and has had to try to read 6 volumes of hundreds and hundreds of pages. They've had it, presumably for a little period of time. That's always what happens, which is they get a heads up to be able to read, to be able to look through, to be able to go through. The Prime Minister tomorrow needs to walk in and say that he will support all of the recommendations. Peter Dutton should do the same thing too.
And this is where the government will thoroughly consider every recommendation. We want to work across the parliament on these issues and do what we can to ensure that just as our veterans and defence personnel step up for our country, we have an obligation to step up for them.
So do it. Do it. Prioritise it. You've got Parliament. If there's any need to change laws in the next week, you've got a chance to do it. It comes back a couple of weeks after that. Front and centre. Front and centre. You will have, no doubt, bipartisan support on all of this stuff. If I'm missing some little detail that might be a hiccup here, but all of those things that I've just shown you, all of the extreme majority of that 120 things that I have shown you are all pretty easy. They're all to be done, and I don't care how much it costs. Australians need to know that their Defence Force takes care of people who are willing to put their lives on the line to take care of us. To any current member of the Australian Defence Force, thank you for what you do. To every former member of the Defence Force, thank you for what you have done. Thank you for your service. If you are the CEO, a chairman, a middle manager of any company in any part of the country, when a person who has served this country applies for a job, give it to them, because they need to be known that they are loved. And finally, to the families of those that are currently serving or those that have served in the past, strength and love. It is a tough life, it is a hard life, and I know how proud you are of the men and women who serve. So again, on the behalf of a very grateful nation, thank you for what you do to prop them up. It is now the job of 27 million other people in the country to prop you up and to prop them up.